Welcome to another episode of the Catholic Novel. Today I'm going to talk about Alice McDermott's new novel, The Ninth Hour. Alice has written 7 novels, and they're all good, but this is one of the best. So I confess right at the beginning, I am a fan of Alice McDermott's novels. So you have to put that into context, but I think this is really a terrific novel. Now, as I mentioned in the first 8 series of our first Catholic novel series, I got hooked on the Catholic novel when I was in high school. I read, in college, I read Graham Greene, Evil and War, Francois Mauriac, and all of these novels were very personal to me. They really had an impact on my life. So for many, many years, this has been one of my interests. I'm going to use a book I used in the first series because it underlines how important the Catholic novel can be. The book I'm going to refer to is Richard Gilman's Faith, Sex, and Mystery. And in it, Gilman tells how he was a nominally Jewish but irreligious, began to read Catholic novels, was intellectually converted to Catholicism, and then was baptized and became a Catholic, and then eventually drifted back into complete secularism. And he said when he reread the novels, the religious parts seemed to be the weakest parts, which of course, if you're a secularist, that makes a great deal of sense. You know, if you're a secularist reading a novel about God, it's not going to be too interesting to you. But the reason I mention it is the importance of those novels that I read in high school and college. Now, Gilman says in his book, no one is writing novels like Greene, Mauriac, Bernanos, and War. And he was right. No one was. But now, there is a new kind of a Catholic novel, and I think it is best expressed, the best example of it is the novels of Alice McDermott. And they're quite different. You know, there was a term that critics used in relation to Graham Greene. They called it Greenland. And what they meant was the terrain, the atmosphere in which Graham Greene wrote. It was, you know, it was always an abandoned place, often physically extremely uncomfortable. Often, you know, it seemed like it was just filled with sin, and it seemed like God was absent. And then in his most important novels, God enters, and he enters as the Hound of Heaven. And that was a theme in a number of Catholic novels. The sinner is apparently on the brink of hell, and then there is a dramatic moment when God enters, and apparently the sinner is saved and redeemed. The whiskey priest in The Power and the Glory, he's committed fornication, he's an alcoholic, he's going to be shot by the Mexican soldiers. And is he going to hell, or is he a saint? Because he's been caught because he reached out to try to help somebody else. Or Lord Marchmain in Evil and War's Brideshead Revisited. He has mocked the church for 25 years, has no use for it at all. Suddenly on his deathbed, when the priest says to him, give me a sign, make a sign that you are sorry for your sins. He's in a kind of a coma, the Marchmain. And then suddenly, he blesses himself. Or Morris Bendrix and Sarah in The End of the Affair. In some mysterious way, Greene seems to be saying, in some mysterious way, their adulterous love opens them up to God's love. And then finally, probably the most famous example, Scobie in The Heart of the Matter. And that's going to be one of the novels we talk about. Scobie commits suicide. Okay, is he in hell, or is he a kind of a martyr? And when that book came out, theologians discussed this. I mean, that's how important Catholic novels were back in the 1940s. So now Alice McDermott is writing a new kind of a Catholic novel. And to illustrate it, I'm going to use a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins. Now, this is my interpretation. Okay, if it doesn't make sense to you, fine. But my experience of Alice's novels, my initial experience was, these are not Catholic novels, because they weren't like the novels of Greene or War or Bernanos or Mauriac. And so one of them she wrote was called After This. I had no idea why it was called that. And I felt really stupid until Alice told me that somebody who was involved in the publishing of the book, I don't know whether it was her agent or a publisher or an editor or someone, didn't know, he or she didn't know what the title meant either. The title is from the prayer, Hail Holy Queen. Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy, our life, our sweetest and our hope. To thee we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. And after this, show unto us. And that's a perfect expression for that novel, and really, in a sense, for all Alice's novels. They take place in a world of grace. Grace is everywhere. So while The Hound of Heaven works terrifically to interpret Green, War, Mauriac, or Bernanos, I don't think it works so well to interpret Alice's novels. I think Christ is present from the first sentence to the last sentence. So it's not a sudden intrusion. You know, as I say, those traditional novels had a tremendous impact on me. As a matter of fact, looking back on my life, I wonder if they influenced me and affected me even more than quote unquote spiritual reading. You know, reading The Imitation of Christ or reading Francis de Sales. First of all, if Christ is everywhere, spiritual reading can be reading the New York Times. Or spiritual activity can be watching television. God can speak to us anywhere. And just looking at my own life, I wonder if those novels had as much impact on me as anything I read, with the exception of Scripture, okay? This novel, The Ninth Hour, here's how I interpret it. And let me introduce myself first, a problem I have. I do not notice details. Here's what I mean. I can be teaching a course at St. John's University for 2 months, and if someone says to me, how many windows are there in that room, I would not be able to answer. And I do this in class sometimes. After lecturing about 30 minutes, I put my hands over my eyes and I say, and I'm telling the truth, I don't know what anybody in this room is wearing, which I think, and I'm not bragging, I think this is terrible. If my sister was in the classroom, she could tell you what kind of socks everybody was wearing. So I'm in awe of Alice McDermott's ability to notice details. Was she born with that talent? I don't know. I don't know. Did she train herself as a novice? I don't know. But I'm not kidding. The descriptions in The Ninth Hour are absolutely awesome. So that's the first thing I want to say before I read this poem, that everything is almost like a word from God, that creation is charged with God's grace. Okay, that's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say is Christ is everywhere. I've read The Ninth Hour at least twice, and I've gone over sections for this television show. I encourage you to read it, and here is the poem that I think this explains the novel to me and much of Alice McDermott's writing. This poem is by Gerard Manley Hopkins. It's sometimes called Number 34. But also it's referred to by the first lines as Kingfishers Catch Fire, okay? So I know it's hard to pick this up on the bounce, but I think this is important because this is the key that enables me, I think, to understand Alice McDermott's novels. So I'm going to read the poem to you. The first stanza is all about everything speaks its essence. Everything sort of throws out its being. And that's why I tend to think of creation as words from God, messages from God. Okay, so that's the first stanza. The second stanza is about Christ. Okay, so the first stanza. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumble over rim in roundy wells stones ring, like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells. Selves, goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. Now, so that's true of everything. And now we get to the person in the state of grace. Gerard Manley Hopkins, the author of the poem, refers to him as the just man. I say more. The just man justices, keeps grace. That keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye, what in God's eye he is, Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes, not his, to the Father, through the features of men's faces. So I think in Alice McDermott's novels, Christ is playing in 10,000 places. And I think it's true of all of them, but it's even more obvious in the Ninth Hour. What's the story? the involvement of a family with the nursing sisters of the sick poor. And there's no, well, let me say this. In an interview several years ago, Alice said, every sentence I write is affected by my faith. And I remember reading that thinking, that's a bit of an exaggeration, I suspect, okay? I don't think so anymore. I think every sentence she writes is affected and influenced by her faith. And that's why I think Christ is there right at the very beginning and right to the end. But anyway, at the very beginning, there's a kind of a humorous scene, but it sort of captures Alice's incarnational view. A nursing sister is returning from a call she had, taking care of someone. And her bladder is pressing against her very, very much. She's desperate to get to a ladies' room. But then a call comes that someone needs her. So you've got the call from nature and you've got the call from God. And they are not part of two different worlds. There's only one world, and it's the world redeemed and saved by Jesus Christ. And I think that is just tremendous. So that's it. You know, the scene is partly humorous, but I think it's very theological. Okay, and I don't want to say too much because there is a kind of a what should I call it? A surprise, kind of surprise, and it focuses on the title of the novel. Of course, the ninth hour is the hour in which Jesus died, and it's also one of the hours in the church's office. But it has another meaning in the novel, and that's another point. So there are kind of these multiple levels in Alice's novel. So you got to be attentive, okay? So I would say this: the ninth hour is about as far from Greenland as you can possibly get, okay? This is not a world apparently abandoned by God. This is not a world apparently that Christ is not present in. Okay? No, Christ plays in 10,000 places on every page. So right now, I think I've read 3 reviews of the ninth hour. They are all glowing. So I think Alice is one of the important contemporary Catholic writers. And in addition to this novel, The Ninth Hour, and after this, another one I liked very much is Charming Billy. And in that novel, the whole novel is good, but what interested me very much was, could an alcoholic who is not recovering, who's still an alcoholic, still drinking much too much, could that person be very holy? I think that's really an interesting question, okay? Now, I'm not going to tell you the answer because I don't know the answer, but I am going to suggest you start reading Alice McDermott's novels. I am certain you will not be disappointed.